Hello, welcome once again to Fairtax Power Radio, first edition of 2026. I'm Bob Paxton,
I'm Bob Scarborough.
I'm Steve Hayes.
and we are the FAIRtax Guys, one of which has obviously joined the witness protection program.
That would be me.
Scarborough's in hiding. That looks like the little cabin we rent up there in Folkestone, Georgia, when I go up there to watch trains. But I understand you're up near the Blue. Now, okay, I won't tell you where you are. Don't, so we won't.
Undisclosed location.
That's fine.
Undisclosed location.
Yeah.
All right. Well, actually, Jade Wally was going to join us. He may still come in a bit late, but we need to get cranking on this thing in the first Fairtax Power Radio episode of 2026. And as usual, we'd like to have AFFT President Steve Hayes with us for this occasion to give us his annual State of the Fair Tax. And part of this kind of it involves Jade, so hopefully he will be able to join us a bit later. But Steve, I will give you the floor, and you can tell us what the State of the Fair Tax is as we enter calendar 2026.
Well, it's one of those things where everybody says, well, it couldn't be better, we're going to da-da-da. And in actuality, this is one of the times when there is a lot of truth in that statement. And let me tell you the reason why. We have done two, I will say, national polls. They were done by polling companies that poll for everyone from the president to Sean Hannity to, the big networks and all, that both showed a majority of people in favor of not only getting rid of the income tax, but replacing it with a consumption tax. Now, the definition of the consumption tax, it kind of splits out a little bit because a lot of people don't really understand what that would mean, but they don't want the income tax. And recently on X and on social media, there's been this huge barrage of mostly younger people. And interestingly enough, in the poll results, getting rid of the income tax had in one poll 70% support from people under 30.
Wow.
So you've got a lot of people, well, a lot of them, but a lot of older demographics as well are now on X and on different social media, and they are calling, some of them are saying, hey, let's just stop paying taxes.
Yeah, I've heard that we've got a tax revolt brewing in this country.
Right. And I think that's great. It's fueled in part by, not in part, probably in large part, by the president repeatedly saying, and I say that, he's done it at least 4 or 5 different times in the last 6 months, that he wants to get rid of the income tax. You've got Secretary of the Treasury Bessent saying, we need to get rid of the income tax. You've got Lutnick, who's Secretary of Commerce, saying, we need to get rid of the income tax. And none of these fellows are going to be out there, because Trump is not an easy boss, saying something that he doesn't like. So it's obviously an agreement coming from the top. And the one fellow that Congressman Linder and I are working with, Matt Towery, is very, very much involved in, let's just say, the higher Republican circles. He's a pollster, but he's also on Laura Ingraham 3 days a week, and he's got a presence out there. And, Matt says, look, right now, most everything is concerned with getting the Republican Congress majority in place after the midterms. But
yeah, that's the one thing that I'm a little afraid of, because historically the president's party loses ground in the midterms, and the Republicans are just barely hanging on in both houses. And if either one of them flips, that's going to make it really tough to get this thing through in the next year. So it's time to get going right here and right now.
Yeah, well, what I'm trying to do, and we're probably going to getting some money now for it. We're probably going to do another poll sometime February sometime, and try to show, and we might even target just a couple of states and try to show that this could be a great campaign issue.
Yeah, because we're not going to get it until it becomes a campaign issue, because the guys who write the tax code have been writing it for their own benefit for decades,
and
regardless of
they're
what the
not going to
people
change, Bob, unless the president makes them change, embarrasses them, because they've got too much that they've, in my opinion, have gotten from the tax code. It's sort of like, one of us saying, "Oh, we're gonna let somebody have our home because maybe they need it more than we do, and we're gonna go live in our car." Well, a lot of these guys have made a big living, and a lot of Washington makes a huge amount of money off the tax code. And by that I mean not so much that they're gaming the system, but it's like they go to the radio broadcaster network, like Bob's a member of, I'm sure, and they say, "We're going to put a fee on blah, 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 blah," or "We're looking at it." They don't say they are. We're looking at raising money by raising your taxes on something. And then Bob's group has a lobbyist who they throw money at and say, "Go stop it." And so they get lots of money because that lobbyist then, when Congressman X or Congresswoman Y has a fundraiser, they take some of that money that Bob's group sent them and they buy tickets. The expensive ones, not the kind that maybe the three of us would buy, but they buy big tables in front. And they can do that legally. So are they giving money directly to them? No. But they're giving money for their benefit because they use it to get reelected. And so you've got a ton of inertia. And that's why it's so important to have the president saying it. Now, the truth is that the president saying we're going to get rid of it, we're going to get rid of it, we're going to get rid of it, makes it much tougher for these members of Congress because they now have to defend the system. And you know how hard that's going to be.
And they don't want to tell the truth, the real truth about why they're defending the system.
That's right. No, they can't. They can't because they'll be exposed. And it's not a very well kept secret because it's public, the lobbying amounts. But that is the problem. And the fair tax has the advantage of not relying on tariffs. Like the president would love to do this strictly on tariff income. But it's really not going to happen because he's gotten all of these, not all, many of these big countries who import to our country to agree to build factories in the U.S. Trillions of dollars of investment. When that happens, they're no longer importers. So that product line that was paying heavy fees no longer is imported. So what you've got is a problem in that he wants to get rid of the income tax because he's a guy who's had to deal with it himself. He's not like some of these bureaucrats who never really understood it. He wants to get rid of it, but he needs a replacement. And when you start looking at replacements, there are very few that get rid of the income tax. We can talk about them if you want. The value-added tax, which is another form of the sales tax, where you put a tax on each step of production. You've got the retail sales tax, the fair tax. And you've got a third one that's being talked about more now, but this is more something that only a pencil head in Washington could like, but it's the tax on every transaction, the transaction tax. In other words, when you guys buy something for your show, some piece of equipment, a piece of that transaction, whether it's charged or not, gets taken out and sent to the Treasury. Every time you make a purchase at the grocery, a little piece gets taken out. Every time there's a stock transfer or a purchase or sale, a piece gets taken out. Okay? And it's all done electronically. It's all done at the clearinghouse, basically. So it's not affecting any of us. And the problem is, even though it's a tiny percent, it's going to multiply out, but it's also, you think the income tax is hard to find how much we actually pay. You'll never know how much you're paying under this tax because, did that price of that advertisement that Bob sells on his show go up because of this or because of whatever? Well, you don't know that. And of course, Congress is going to blame Bob. He's just being greedy. When in fact, his costs have gone up because everything's higher through this transaction tax. So you've got not very many options that don't require the internal revenue. And that's where we are. Probably, if I were going to say the three choices they have, or four choices: tariffs, or a combination of these, financial transaction tax, fair tax, and value-added tax. Pretty limited offering.
Dr. Linder, in a previous program that we had months ago, in probably the beginning of 2025, we asked him, how sure is it that we'll end up going with HR 25? And he said that after everything else is reviewed or scrutinized or debated, then the only logical path at that point forward is the fair tax. Mm-hmm. You see that, Steve?
I think John's right, but John and I also agree that there's never been a bill presented in Congress of this type that hasn't been changed. And the fair tax itself, the great part about it is it's really difficult to change without it being very obvious. You're going to have someone, and Trump's got some things where when he was running against DeSantis, where he said, I heard him say it, I'm never going to put a 30% tax on your groceries. Okay. And he's talking about the external rate of the fair tax. So, are they going to exempt groceries? Probably not if they do it the smartest way, but they may increase the prebate. Mm-hmm. Because if you increase the amount of the prebate, and let's say instead of a family of four making $40,000 a year with no tax, you go to a family of four making $60,000 a year with no tax because of the amount of the prebate coming back. What does that do? It causes that 23% rate to probably go to 24 or 25. Okay? In order to make up the money. Mm-hmm. And it causes then people who are able to make big purchases to pay more by a couple of points, about a 33% external rate instead of 30. So that part is something that they could do. But when you start looking at other things, there's very little you can do and be revenue neutral. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to raise the rate to do it. And quite honestly, the people like Mondami or whatever his name is in New York would love it if you had no tax on the first 100,000 and everything paid by people making over 100,000. Mm-hmm. Be paying 40 to 50%. In other words, if they buy that 60,000, you can't buy a car, I guess, in their league for 60,000, but their $100,000 car, they'd pay another 40 to 50,000 of tax.
Wow.
He would love it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people who are supporting him would love it without thinking through what that means.
But I'll tell you what,
With
Was it? Well, I'm kind of keeping an eye on our time here. There's
ah,
another little area I want to get into with you. That
yes,
hopefully that we were going to have Jade on with us, but apparently he is tied up and can't join us. But you're talking about some organizational changes in the leadership of Americans for Fair Taxation. Address that if you would.
of course, the old crew, so to speak, myself and the others are not leaving, but we're bringing in a transition team, which we expect to ultimately be able to take over. Of young, energetic board members from
Like,
different areas.
yeah, like
Okay,
Jade.
like Jade, and younger than Jade, but different backgrounds, different ways of looking at things that have one thing in common. They all hate the income tax and want to pass the fair tax because they've done their own looking into it and they feel like this is something. And we had a meeting with many of them, and it's interesting to me, and this is because I'm not in that group, but in their groups, there's a lot more discussion than we ever thought there was about alternatives to the income tax and
You know,
how
the
terrible the income tax is.
yeah, so
And
so the
that was
polls that we saw earlier revealed a
really
remarkable amount of support for getting rid of the income tax among the younger demographic. That was probably the biggest surprise in all of the polling results that we've done so far.
absolutely. And that bore out with what they talked about and why they wanted to be involved in any way at all on the board or in other ways. So we're making that change because we want it to be one that communicates with that core group that's frankly going to be a big mover to get this done. And we also don't want, though, to have people who know the issue, who've worked hard for a long time, be, in other words, taken off the board, but still be very active in doing what they're doing, but in a gradual, we hope, phase over to where the younger generation is taking more and more of the lead.
So you're
When
looking
you
at an
talk,
executive board and a regular
Right,
board of directors. Okay, go
right.
ahead, Bob.
I was going to say when you have discussions with these young folks across the political code, um, us in our divisive in our divisive political situation we find ourselves in, even more so polarized than in the past. Are these young folks looking at it as bipartisan, as strictly bipartisan, and do they have a better handle on how to present that than maybe we have because we're old?
Well, I think the thing that I kind of got from them is that they don't even present it. They just say it's totally screwed up and everybody agrees with them. And one of them talked about how she got a raise and got much less after the raise than she thought she would get.
Yep. Next tax
And
bracket.
yep, and she said it's just dumb. And what I took away from it, Bob, is that a lot of us may have been overthinking this, using logic and that. There seems to be this growing agreement. It's just wrong, and it needs to be replaced.
One more question on that same thought, and we've always talked about this too, is getting engaged in our communities and the districts and so on, finding people who specifically support the fair tax, HR 25. What is the indication from the young people that we're speaking with about engaging and encouraging people in their own communities to run for office on the fair tax, not necessarily primarily, but included in their platform?
Well, what seems to be the thrust of this is it's no longer the way we grew up, where you go to meetings and you do, like a town hall meeting or whatever, as much as it is going after them on social media, on X, on various Instagram. I mean, there was a couple I'd never heard of, but they were using. All right. And these are ways because the politicians, the growing power of that demographic, the politicians have people that do nothing but follow these. And they can engage a lot of, like we used to say, you need people to make phone calls. Well, now what you need, what I'm hearing, that makes the most impact is you get enough people on X or on Instagram or on some of these others that are being followed by the member of Congress, by their team. And that's maybe even more impact because these people are more likely to vote than somebody that just, goes to a meeting and goes home. So it's a very, very thing. And also they know they have a bigger voice. You and I in front of a town hall are talking to 300 people maybe. On X, you're talking to millions. So potentially, I'm not saying you are, but potentially. And we go through it. The other thing, and this is something that Linda and I sort of had what we call a bognition, not a cognition, but something we should have thought about earlier. Young people, it's not really a joke, I think it's true, believe they've got a better chance of going for a ride in an alien spaceship than getting anything back from Social Security. Because they just believe it's not going to be there at the time when they come in. And the government, because of the debt, can't pay them what's been promised. So they're just contributing to the old folks. The fair tax, because it replaces the funding for Social Security, you've got $2.5 trillion of IOUs in the trust fund. There's no money in the trust fund. It's all IOUs to the government, from the government.
Yeah, it's just paper.
But you've got $2.5 trillion that goes away the day the fair tax is signed. So you just reduce the budget by $2.5 trillion of debt. Excuse me, not the budget, the debt.
Right.
From 30.2 to maybe 30 trillion. Right? You're still not talking huge, but it's a big difference and hasn't been done. And you're totally funding Social Security going forward, not only for those of us who are on Social Security, but also for the generations that are contributing to the economy through their purchases. That is a big point to younger people. And I didn't realize how big, but that's something that was talked about that they're very attuned to. Is this whole thing about Social Security. I think it's a Ponzi scheme. Which it
is.
Yeah. And you've got the number of workers continually declining. Why? You got 10,000 or more every day retiring, qualifying. You've got people living about 20 years longer than they actuarially were in 1960, collecting Social Security. And you've got a situation where there's no way to keep up unless you increase the 12.6% to 15%, which is going to impact the worker because the average worker making under 60,000 pays more in Social Security tax than they do in income tax.
Oh, yeah.
By far. So you're just taking money out of their pocket. So a long answer, which I always do, as you know, but anyway, long answer, but the young people are behind this for the right reasons. They see it more clearly. And like I said, I think some of us have been overthinking it as far as the young people are concerned, because I was just very impressed. And they're from all different areas. They're not just, a little small business owner or whatever. There's a guy that works for a big company. There's an accountant. There's, and Jada's obviously an accountant. And they're all seeing it from a different light. So it was very exciting. And I think Trump is tapping into that because most of the posts on X are from young people, demanding reform, get rid of the income tax. Let's not pay.
And we know that his son, Barron Trump, was significant in advising him to go on particular influencer shows like Joe Rogan and
Right.
so which helped solidify that lower demographic appeal to what President Trump was saying at the time.
Yes. No, I think you're 100% right. And he's got the advantage of, even though he's very, very strong in his ideas and his rightness, he's got a valuable thing this term, not so much the last term, and that is he's willing to change course if he sees a better way to go.
Yes.
He keeps going towards where he wants to be, but he doesn't mind if he has to go a little bit this way to get there.
Right.
And that's what I've noticed, and that's what some of the people who I've talked to that know him said, that it's different.
All right, we got about 2 minutes left here, Steve. So let me give you the last 2 minutes. Sum up the 2026 state of the fair tax in 2 minutes, if you can do it.
I can do it probably by saying, if the Republicans keep a majority in Congress, President Trump has not a big problem health-wise or something, that 2027 is very possibly going to be the year we have serious tax reform, which will result, we believe, in the fair tax pretty much in the form it's now presented. Obviously, there will be some changes they'll try to make, but we'll eliminate the income tax and eliminate the IRS and eliminate the Social Security disaster that's happening now in 2027, if the houses are kept and if President continues to be healthy and continues to be able to push this forward.
All right. Well, hopefully a year from now, when we get on with your 2027 state of the fair tax, you can tell us that we are right on the verge of getting this. But for now, it's still looking good, but there is work to be done, especially you mentioned all the inertia in Congress. All the people up there that are benefiting handsomely from the income tax system have got to be, they've got to understand that if they don't change their ways, we, the voters, are going to show them the door. And that's how that's going to go. All right. Well, again, Steve, thank you so much for being with us. And we will have you on several more times during the course of the year. But we'll definitely be back next year with the 2027 State of the Fair Tax. Hope some really good news at that point. But that's going to wrap up this edition of FairTax Power Radio. Thank you again so much for watching, listening, sharing the videos on social media. That helps us a great deal. So that's as we normally say. Until we meet again, same time, same channel next week. I am Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob Scarborough.
I'm Steve Hayes.
We are the FairTax Guys, reminding you the fair tax is the only truly fair tax, and once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
So what do you need from me to get these taxes collected?
Glad you asked, because there is a fair amount of information you need to be aware of.
That's your tax plan?
Oh, no, this is just the revisions for this year's tax plan. What I need from you is you need to keep track of all of your income, as well as any taxes that you've already paid. Also, any gifts that you received or gifts you've given to churches or charities or individuals throughout the entire year. Do you do any side jobs?
Every now and again.
Great, because there's some more information about that right here. Everything you need to know right here. So just simply compile that, send it in to us. Be careful, make sure there's no mistakes. If we do find mistakes were made, we can fine you or, throw you in jail. So you might want to be aware of that.
And what do you need from me?
As an individual, nothing. As a business owner, or if you're doing side jobs, yes, you would have to collect taxes on that, but, well, it's all right here.
Can I get a copy of that?